I shared this sermon at St Luke's Mount Albert last Sunday, the 9th of August, reflecting on the well-known story from Matthew 14, in which Peter briefly walks on water. Little did we know that we were heading into something of a storm of uncertainty this week, with COVID-19 cases reappearing in our community here in Auckland. If you'd like to read the Gospel reading in full, you can find it at the link below this video. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Some days there is only the storm. We're in our familiar world like those disciples who'd fished on the Sea of Galilee all their lives. And then we're upended, turned about by a death, by illness, by betrayal, by a pandemic, or job loss, or some terrible hurt. The disciples were in that boat, battered by the waves, all night long. And they were hardened sailors, but I'm sure they feared for their lives. The familiar for them was suddenly unsafe and unpredictable. And meanwhile, Jesus was out of reach. He'd gone to seek solitude and pray on the mountain, perhaps still distressed by the brutal execution of his cousin, John the Baptist. In any case, he seemed unconcerned about the struggle unfolding out on the lake. But then, early in the morning, Jesus came walking towards them, and he identified himself as God by saying, "It is I," echoing, "I am," unmistakably the name of God. And the water itself responded to his presence by bearing his weight. But the disciples were still terrified and bewildered. And then Peter, of course, with impetuous bravery, called out, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And so Jesus invites him with one word, "Come." And there's that extraordinary scene where Peter climbs over the side and starts walking towards Jesus, but then begins to sink, and Jesus reaches out to catch him. One of my mentors in preaching used to say, "Preach the sermon you most need to hear, because chances are others around you will need to hear it too." And I've wrestled with this story this week because, probably like you, I've heard so many sermons about it that make it a story about Peter's faith. And then, by implication, it becomes a story or a sermon about my faith too. Sermons that say Peter had the right idea, climbing out of that boat and stepping out in faith. And of course, we're invited to do the same thing in such sermons. Summon our courage and climb over the side into the chaos. And if you keep your eyes on Jesus, you won't sink. So take the risk, clench up your faith, and if you clench it up hard enough, you'll do better than Peter did. Well, that's not the sermon I need to hear this week. Because, read this way, all this story offers me is a kind of moralistic try harder, grab the tiger by its tail. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And at the end of a sermon like that, I think I'm left feeling worse about my faith, about the struggles I face, about my sense of failure to walk on water. There's no grace in a sermon like that, no good news. So in order to find those things, we have to listen to the rest of the story. I think the story is about much more than Peter's efforts, and that's the sermon I really need to hear this week. So let me start over. Some days there is only the storm. We're in our familiar world, like those disciples who'd fished on that Sea of Galilee all of their lives. And then, like them, we are upended, turned about by a death or illness or betrayal or job loss or some awful hurt. And the storm seems never-ending, and it's dark, and we can't see the way ahead. We've been blown way out to sea. But we're still together in the boat, clinging on. And then, as the dawn is rising, we see a figure, and hear a voice through the wind and through the rain, which seem to be dropping. A voice that's so familiar and beloved. Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. But I am afraid. I can't see him clearly, and surely it's my imagination. Didn't he stay behind on the shore last night? I saw him climbing the hill, heading away on his own. And then Peter, sitting right beside me, leaps up and calls out, scaring us all, and he starts to climb out of the boat. And then I can suddenly see that it is Jesus, right here with us, in the storm, in the rain and in the waves. And when Peter starts to struggle, Jesus catches him. And then, in a matter of moments, they're both tumbling into the boat with us, wet and breathless. And suddenly, like nothing I've ever seen before, the wind is gone. The churning waves around us become still. There is a holiness in the quiet, and Jesus looks around at all of us with love. We were lost, and he walked into the storm to find us, to climb into our boat. Our God, in the love and grace of Christ, is present in all things, even when we feel overwhelmed by the storm. Christ comes to us in the midst of the chaos, not because of our faith, but because of his love for us, even when all we can manage is to sit in the boat and cling on. He walks across the tumult and climbs into our boat and sits down with us, bringing peace. I leave you with the words of a Celtic prayer. It's a beautiful prayer I'd not read before this week. These words are for anyone who may have need of them today. Calm me, O Lord, as you stilled the storm. Still me, O Lord, keep me from harm. Let all tumult within me cease. Enfold me, Lord, in your peace. That's the sermon I needed to hear this week. I hope some of you did too. Amen. Thanks for listening. See you again next time.